Hello, my name is Paul B., and I want to thank you very much for responding to my request that you watch this video. I'm asking you to help save my life. And in fact, I'm asking you to save my life because, as you're going to see here, there can be no other outcome if I don't receive some help than the end of my life. I'm going to move fast through this for the benefit of your time. There's a lot of information here, and there's much, much more online. I hope you'll listen to this even if you're not interested in taking the case, because these are things you need to know about the state that you live in. As my dog tags say, the state of Minnesota's solution to homelessness is a final solution. Exterminate the homeless off camera by, number 1, neglecting the homeless until they move to another jurisdiction if possible and become someone else's problem. Or 2, neglect the homeless until they simply die, off camera, or cremated, buried in a mass grave with other so-called indigents. This is Minnesota's response to the homeless problem, other than a couple of token gestures that they put in a media that protects this government. How did I become homeless? I moved to Minnesota 10 years ago, immediately started working. I worked for the same company for many years, about 8 years. I was working on a 10-year plan to open up my own guitar store south on Old Route 66. That was going fantastically. However, in the last 3 years before I became homeless, a neighbor started getting replaced with, shall we say, lower class neighbors, and these people terrorized and tormented me endlessly with a variety of reasons, mainly to do with noise. Extremely loud, violent noise. This noise incapacitated me inside my own home. I could not even function. I did not have internet at home. I did not have a television at home. I worked at home. Not my job, but when I got home from work, I would work on things that were important to me, researching and writing books, working on planning the store, things related to that. They completely incapacitated me to the point where I could not even use the bathroom. I had to have a bottle in my bedroom, and I just sat in that one room out of the entire apartment I paid for. You will see in a moment the science that backs that up. In the end, I ended up with about 7,000 hours of recordings in context, which demonstrate beyond any doubt what I was subjected to inside my own home. The landlord refused to enforce his lease. He had a clause specifically against noise and that kind of abuse of neighbors. He refused to enforce that, and instead he would blame the victim, say that I'm hypersensitive to noise, which I address fully on my website, minnesota.com. And he performed a constructive eviction. He contributed to making my life such a living hell that I had no choice but to leave there. There was not even remotely legal grounds for evicting me in any legal way. He couldn't have. I was the perfect resident. Paid on time, minded my own business, didn't bother anybody, and I even helped improve his property at my own expense. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better tenant. And yet, when I went to the police, this is in New Brighton, when I went to the police, I went to the city first because the police were known to not help people. I went to the city in order to have them compel the police to do this. The police chief and a sergeant, off camera but in front of the city council, told me that if I call them for help, quote, it will stop. Instead, what happened is when I called the police for help, they basically razzed me about it, once again blaming the victim. They defended perpetrators they had not even spoken to yet, and this is all recorded on my Minnesota YouTube channel. You can hear the entire police visit. And in the end, the police implied that the solution to the problem is that I move away, that the victim moves away, bears the full brunt of expense, time, effort to move away. I paid $620 a month for what was otherwise a very nice place within walking distance of my workplace. Moving away from there would have cost me thousands upon thousands of dollars over the future years, as I had to pay more rent elsewhere. farther away than I lived from my workplace. At the time, I wrote an open letter to the Minnesota news media because another New Brighton resident was being terrorized by his neighbors. They had put out 44 police calls, and the police did absolutely nothing, as they did in my case. In the end, the neighbor he was complaining about shot him dead. This is the Todd Stevens murder. That neighbor also shot Stevens' girlfriend, almost killed her. The city throughout showed absolutely no concern for my plight. It meant nothing to them. I then followed the chain of command all the way up, eventually to the governor's office. Not once did I ever receive a response from government. And yet they all collected their paychecks. In the end, I ended up losing my job. I had filed an internal ethics complaint on behalf of basically everybody. No one else had the moral courage to put their neck on the line, but this is an FDA-regulated industry. I filed an internal ethics complaint, a very legitimate one. The retaliation, it happened to be right at the time when a new president came in. The retaliation was just simply to get rid of me with the purge that he ran when he arrived, and got rid of a whole bunch of people who had been there for years, a quarter of a century. No advance notice. I walk into work one day and I'm turned around. Now, I was not in any position to handle any of this properly. That sent me into that home life, that intolerable home, 24 hours a day. And the idea of me conducting a job search, trying to manage things, was impossible for a variety of reasons. I couldn't even function in that home. Like I said, I had a bottle in my bedroom to use as a bathroom because I couldn't even go to my bathroom without being tortured by these people. The company then threatened to leave the state if Governor Dayton did not give them almost $1 million in corporate welfare as a, quote, job provider, as this new president replaced all of the people he just fired. Governor Dayton, in his ignorance, gave them $800,000 in corporate welfare, even though there's no way they were going to leave the state. And that came out of my taxes. When all of this happened, I had no family support. Both of my parents had recently died about a year earlier, within a year of each other. To this day, I have not had one moment of peace to properly grieve their loss. I had no friends because when I moved to Minnesota, I more or less got stranded here. All my friends were in other states. I immediately went to work, and I worked so hard for this company, overtime constantly, unpaid overtime on salary. I never met new friends here. I just stayed at home and worked on my projects on that dream of the guitar store. Yet throughout all of this, all parties I have gone to in the state of Minnesota have instinctively blamed the victim and defended the perpetrators, even though none of them have conducted anything that even resembles the beginning of a competent investigation. Their instinctive response is to blame the victim and defend the perpetrator, just like you can hear the police officer do in the recording. Since I became homeless, I have been shocked and horrified and terrified to realize what I told you earlier about the state of Minnesota's response to homelessness. In particular, it is effectively illegal in the state of Minnesota for me to get a job and work my way out of this. Many official forms carry a certification of truth that prohibits me from signing or submitting those forms legally. For example, I certify under penalty of perjury, a felony, that all information provided here is true and correct to the best of my knowledge. It is impossible for me to fill in the permanent resident address box because I have none. And if I put anything else in there, even when someone says you can use my address, if I put in something else willingly, I'm committing perjury, a felony. These forms include employment applications, W-4 tax forms, tax returns, federal and state, voter's registration, unemployment insurance compensation, automobile registration, and much more. As it turns out, several years ago I had written to my state senator about the automobile registration requirement because it occurred to me at that time, ironically, that homeless people would have no way to register their vehicles, and without a vehicle they can't really work their way out of homelessness. In fact, they're going to end up living under a bridge. That legislator responded to me by mailing me at my home at the time and said, I understand your concerns about the homeless, but we feel that this takes priority, which is another way of stating that we do not care whether the homeless live or die. Throughout my experience, government has been worse than no help. It has been the main obstacle I have had to getting out of homelessness. For example, there is absolutely nothing to prevent employment discrimination against the homeless. There's nothing in place. There is everything on the basis of sex and race and age, physical disability. There is nothing in place to prevent discrimination against people because they're homeless. And remember, homelessness means in most cases that they also have difficulty maintaining their hygiene. I was denied my right to vote in the general election in 2016 because I'm homeless. I was not able to register to vote without a permanent address. The state of Minnesota provides no meaningful or accessible shelters, hygiene facilities, laundry, or transportation repair assistance to homeless people, all of which are fundamental to beginning the process of working your way out of homelessness without government assistance. Yet the state built a football stadium. I wrote to all 200 Minnesota legislators individually by email. I did not spam them at once. I wrote to each individually. I referred them to a video on my Minnesota YouTube channel which stated that Minnesota's treatment of the homeless was tantamount to state-sponsored negligent homicide. I received 2 responses out of those 200 emails. One was from a legislator who simply asked me what my permanent resident address was so that he could mail me a response. The second one came from Senator Julie Rosen, who just wrote back, "No, thank you." Once again, I submit to you that the state of Minnesota's response to homelessness is to exterminate the homeless off camera, without conscience, without shame. Throughout my experience dealing with government, both before I became homeless and afterwards, it has been one encounter with racketeering after another. By my definition of racketeering, my definition is consistent with the mafia or RICO laws. It can either be when one party controls both the supply and demand, or when the party creates a no-win catch-22 situation or Hobson's choice that deprives the victim of all feasible freedom. For example, if you own a small business and everything is going fine, one day Rocco walks in with a baseball bat in one hand, a can of gasoline in the other, and he offers to protect your place from vandalism and fire if you pay him some money. He created the supply and the demand. That is classic racketeering. The examples I'm about to list for you in Minnesota state government fit that profile perfectly. This is racketeering. The first 2 examples are general examples so that you will understand how they relate to other people out there, not just the homeless. The master tobacco settlement, which was initiated by the state of Minnesota in the first place, is almost certainly unconstitutional to begin with. The states were never meant to gang up together against corporations. However, in any event, the master tobacco settlement provided the basis, the legal justification for the state of Minnesota to constantly, repeatedly raise tobacco taxes over and over and over again. And yet, the basis of the master tobacco settlement was that tobacco companies had provided a product that addicted people so completely that they could not quit. If they can't quit, then when you raise taxes on them, they have no feasible option but to pay those extra taxes. That is racketeering. And it deliberately impoverishes smokers, 1/5 of the Minnesota population. Likewise, tobacco taxes were used to build a football stadium. A football stadium that discriminates against tobacco users. That is racketeering. Specific to the homeless issue, as I've experienced, there is no government provision against employers terminating whistleblowers, as when I raised my internal ethics complaint in an FDA-regulated industry. And yet, my tax dollars went to corporate welfare for that same employer who responded to my ethics complaint, to my whistleblowing, by terminating me and then going to Governor Dayton and asking for corporate welfare as a job provider while he replaced me. That is racketeering. The government wrote and passed noise laws, the very laws that gave me the legal basis for challenging what my neighbors were doing to me with the loud and violent vibration and noise that went on 24 hours a day where I lived. They were torturing and terrorizing me inside my home. They made my home a prison. The government wrote and passed those noise laws. When they did so, that obligated me to pursue a remedy through the system of laws that they had created. And yet, that same government who wrote and passed those laws refused to enforce those laws on my behalf. But they would enforce those laws on other people's behalf. That is racketeering. The government effectively made me homeless through their sheer neglect, the refusal to do the job that they accepted a paycheck for doing, specifically to enforce those laws that they themselves had written and passed. The government made me homeless, and yet, because I was homeless, and because of the laws written by these same legislators, I was denied my right to vote. So it was against the law for me to vote them out of office. So they created the conditions that made it impossible for me to vote them out of office because of the conditions that they create. Do you understand where I'm going with this? That is racketeering. That is Rocco with a baseball bat and a can of gasoline. This is what the mafia does. By law, I must file a tax return. And yet, I would have to violate the law as a homeless person if I filed a tax return. This is racketeering. I cannot file a tax return because it has that disclaimer about truthful information to the best of my knowledge when I can't fill in the resident address box. I have no resident address. Government mandates a permanent resident address for car registration. And yet, if you do not have a car legally, you cannot effectively get a job which is necessary as a preliminary to getting a permanent address. Not everybody was born in a place with a trolley. I was not even born in Minnesota. I am used to using a vehicle, and I worked very hard to earn this vehicle that I now live in. And it's inexcusable that this state should set up laws that are intended to have me get rid of this vehicle and rely on their public transportation, which makes no sense in the first place, as a means of getting a job, which is a preliminary to getting a home. This is racketeering. It's inexcusable that I cannot register this car. The government declares a need for public assistance because of desperate circumstances among the poor and the homeless. This implies duress. If there's such an urgent need that public assistance is necessary for these people, that implies that these people are under duress. And yet, to obtain that assistance, those poor and homeless must sign abundant documents that any responsible person who is not under duress would never sign, particularly waivers for the use of their personal information, which can have a terribly dramatic impact on their future professional career. This is racketeering. 1 year ago, I took the only job I have been able to get since I've been homeless. It was at a truck wash. The only reason I could work there is because the owner was so incompetent. He did not even fill out W-4s. He had me sign no papers. But at the same time, he didn't pay us on time. He did not pay me what he had promised. He turned out to be the most abusive person I have ever met in my life. And his place was rife with safety violations, child labor, including child endangerment. One of the children was injured and went to the hospital. Environmental health and safety issues. In fact, there was absolutely nothing from a professional business standpoint that was done properly at this place. This man encouraged me to sleep indoors because of the weather conditions outside. I resisted, but eventually I had no choice because the heat was causing me to hemorrhage inside my vehicle. When I did go inside, as he encouraged me to do, I then found out he was watching me sleep over the security cameras at night from the comfort of his own home. This is the creepiest individual I have ever met in my life. And this is the only kind of help that the homeless get. Self-serving help. This kind of treatment led to panic attacks, which I am not prone to. After one of those panic attacks, when he had been particularly abusive, I quit and I gave him proper notice, 2 weeks notice. He immediately fired me so that I could not get unemployment insurance. And there's nothing I can do about it. And I could not have gotten unemployment insurance anyway because I can't fill in a resident address. I then went to look to shelters for help. The shelters provide no meaningful assistance to the homeless who are salvageable. Instead, the shelters focus their attention on people who are alcoholics and on drugs with disabilities, things of that nature. They focus on people who will be dependent on government for the rest of their life. There is no goal to get people out of homelessness other than a token person here and there, and those people only get out marginally, usually in government housing, which is so full of restrictions that their freedom is gone. That is not escaping homelessness by any stretch of the imagination. For people like me who are sane, sober, well-educated, articulate, very hard-working, these shelters do absolutely nothing. In fact, they hated my presence there. They despised having me around precisely because I'm so easy to get out of homelessness, and it exposes that these shelters are doing nothing for all the government funding they receive. These shelters demanded that I fill out forms, including waivers of personal information. If you look at my videos, you will find that I went to graduate school for computer science. I left graduate school without a degree because I was disgusted by the way that information was being weaponized within computer science. I then spent many years researching and writing a book that talked about this and warned people about this in the 1990s. Nobody wanted to hear it back then. Now it's common knowledge. And yet these people have the audacity to ask me to sign a waiver allowing the use of my personal information. This is contemptible. These people don't even know what they're talking about. I've known about it for 20 years, and I've been traveling the whole country telling people about it for 20 years. This is contemptible. These shelters are self-serving. Their main purpose is to achieve funding for the next year for themselves, to maintain their own jobs so that they don't become homeless. Many of these people cannot even remember my name. Throughout, the news media has ignored my story and consistently, without exception, protected government, corruption, negligence, and incompetence. I already told you about when I wrote the open letter regarding the murder of Todd Stevens by his neighbor in my community, because the police had done nothing to help him, just as they had done nothing to help me. The press did not respond or cover it at all. Likewise, I have gone to the media repeatedly, including when I was denied my right to vote. The media did not ever once respond to me. The one time I spoke to the media was when they didn't know who they were talking to. At a shelter recently, the Star Tribune sat down with several people, and they sat down with me. I was by far the most articulate, the most knowledgeable. I had the homeless consultant channel full of videos explaining what's going on. But what I did criticized government. When the Star Tribune printed its coverage a couple weeks later, it covered everyone else, the drunks, the drug addicts, and it omitted me completely. The news media in Minnesota covers up government, corruption, negligence, and incompetence. How I became homeless, again, is documented at www.minnesota.com. This includes, again, a large sample of the 7,000 hours of audio recordings I had made inside my apartment, including showing you exactly how I made those audio recordings. I had a home recording studio, so I know my stuff. It also includes many references to the academic peer-reviewed science behind the relationship between noise and health, and the way that noise has been deliberately weaponized by military, police, and other organizations specifically for the purpose of incapacitating the victim, Not to kill them directly, but to incapacitate them, which is exactly what I told everyone was happening to me in my home. And even as I showed them the scientific literature, nobody wanted to hear it. And they let me be tortured and tormented out of my own home. The past year since I started at the truck wash, that is documented at my YouTube channel called The Homeless Consultant. The easiest way to get there is www.humanstupidity.com. The only reason for that is because throughout all of this, I have lost every possession I've worked my entire life for. And I started working when I was 13. Everything, one at a time. That includes about 24 URLs. The only one that's left is humanstupidity.com. So I linked it to the Homeless Consultant channel. I'd like to refer you at the Homeless Consultant channel to a couple videos in particular. The last video I put up is called a summary trailer. That explains what all the videos are about. It'll give you an idea. Specifically though, the first videos I put out were called a series called How Not to Do Business. This was a business series, and it explains my experience at the truck wash, which was the most incompetently run business I have ever encountered. And one of my previous jobs was going out and turning around businesses like this. And I'm good at it. Another one is a video called Denied My Right to Vote Because I'm Homeless. That explains everything that happened there, including the fact that to this very day, I have not received a single response from the state of Minnesota to the 2 notarized complaints that I filed on election day at the polling place and handed to the elections judge. I have not received a single response from any of the news media that I contacted on that day when I was denied my right to vote because I'm homeless. Another video I would draw your attention to I did on January 1st. It contains the word osteirophobia. There my goal was to create the beginnings of a legal framework to define the fear, hatred, loathing, and discrimination against the homeless. Because if we do not do this, we are never going to be able to stop discrimination against the homeless. We have all these other terms, homophobia, Islamophobia, whatever phobia. Osteirophobia is the term I'm proposing for fear of the homeless. And if we do not get this into the legal system, we are going to have one heck of a time preventing the kind of discrimination that is leading to, in the state of Minnesota alone, hundreds of deaths of homeless Minnesotans on the street. Lastly, I have several videos that talk about my shelter experience in Dakota County in particular. I encourage you to watch those to learn about what I said, how self-serving they really are. They do absolutely nothing to help the homeless, who are the most easy to get out of homelessness. Lastly, I would like to, there's a video I did called The Donner Party, Minnesota Style. And I want to just pull out one quote from there. What happened was, in the 1800s, the Donner Party was migrating to California, which was not yet a state. Sacramento was still called Sutter's Fort. They listened to some really bad advice, and they got stranded in the Sierra Nevadas, and about half of them ended up dying. And they had to resort to cannibalism. That's what they're known for. They sent out an advance party to try to get over to get help from Sutter's Fort. Only 2 of those people survived. And when the people at Sutter's Fort found out about it, I want to read you what the account was of what happened when they found out how much these people needed help to save their lives. They gave the alarm that the people would all die without assistance. It was 2 weeks before any person would consent to go. Finally, we concluded we would go or die trying. For not to make any attempt to save them would be a disgrace to us and California, as long as time lasted. That's a quote from Daniel Rhodes. I have been asking for help in the state of Minnesota for 5 years now. First, for about 3 years, I was asking for help to just simply enforce the law and stop my neighbors from terrorizing me. Nobody helped. I wasn't asking them to die trying, to put their lives at risk. I was asking them to do the job they accepted a paycheck for, and everyone refused, including my landlord, who I gave about $60,000 in rent over the years. Then I asked for help to avoid becoming homeless. And I'll just give you one more example of what happened there. I went to a Methodist church and asked for help. I didn't need money at the time. I had enough money. I needed help because, again, I'm alone in this world. The pastor didn't help, and she did not mobilize her congregation. Instead, as I was leaving, she said, "Maybe we'll see your stuff on Storage Wars." That's the kind of help I've received in the state of Minnesota, consistently, without exception. After I became homeless, I have been begging people to help me. If you include the churches and the pastors I've gone to, I have gone to the representatives of tens of thousands of Minnesotans. And yet, as I said, I am now out of money, I'm out of things to sell, it is still winter, I'm running out of gas, I'm running out of food, I have no income. It can't be any other way. If I don't get help, I will die. I will die of third world conditions, hunger and exposure in 21st century Minnesota, right in front of everybody's eyes, after 5 years of asking people for help. Finally, we concluded we would go or die trying, for not to make any attempt to save them would be a disgrace to us and California as long as time lasted. Please, I need your help. Don't bring disgrace to yourself and to Minnesota by doing what these other people have done. Mobilize and help me. Save my life. I did nothing wrong. Please. You can contact me at email hc.paulb@gmail.com. I really appreciate you watching this. Thank you.